The room went completely silent, not the kind of quiet that happens when a meeting wraps up or someone steps out to take a call. This was the kind of silence that fills a space when something has gone terribly, irreversibly wrong, when everyone in the room knows it, and no one is willing to be the first to say so. Arthur Beaumont Clark, the lead partner of one of Toronto's oldest corporate law firms, stood at the head of the conference table on the 32nd floor of a Bay Street tower and watched a $300 million merger dissolve in real time. The client, a Japanese pharmaceutical company called Nakamura Bio, had sent their senior negotiator, a man named Takeshi Mori, all the way from Osaka. He had flown 14 hours, checked into the Fairmont, ordered nothing from the minibar, and arrived that morning in a pressed charcoal suit with a leather portfolio under his arm and a look on his face that said he had done this 100 times before. The deal had taken 11 months to structure, 11 months of calls and counteroffers, and revised term sheets and late nights where the junior associates fueled themselves on takeout sushi, and the kind of optimism that only survives before the first real obstacle. The acquisition target was a Canadian biotech firm, small but brilliant, sitting on a patent portfolio that Nakamura Bio wanted badly enough to send Mori himself to close it. But Mori had stopped talking 20 minutes ago. He had read something in the agreement, something on page 47, buried in a subordinate clause under the indemnification schedule. And he had set the document down on the table very carefully, the way a person sets down a glass they're afraid might shatter. He had said something in Japanese. His assistant, a young woman named Yuki, had translated it as, "There is a discrepancy." After that, Mori had not said another word in English. He spoke only in Japanese now, directly to Yuki, who relayed fragments in a voice that grew quieter with each exchange. The legal team on the Canadian side, 6 lawyers, 2 junior associates, a paralegal named Brett who kept clicking and unclicking his pen, had no idea what was being said. Arthur's senior partner, a woman named Caroline Whitfield, had leaned over and whispered to him, "Tell me we have someone who speaks Japanese." Arthur had said nothing, because the answer was no. He looked around the table. 6 lawyers, 2 associates. Brett with the pen. Not one of them could bridge the gap between what Mori was saying and what needed to happen next. The interpreter they had hired, a contractor booked through an agency, had called in sick at 7 that morning. The backup had not answered. The agency had apologized and offered a refund. A refund for an 11-month deal. Mori pushed back his chair. Not aggressively. That almost made it worse. It was the measured, deliberate movement of a man who had made up his mind and was simply completing the formality of leaving. He said something to Yuki, and Yuki looked at Arthur with an expression that said she was sorry genuinely, and translated, "Mr. Mori would like to return to his hotel. He will have his team review the document and be in touch." Everyone at the table understood what "be in touch" meant. It meant the deal was over. Arthur stood. He said something about rescheduling, about clarifying the clause, about how these things happen, and they could have a revised document by Thursday. The words came out fine, they just didn't land anywhere useful. Mori was already straightening his jacket, reaching for the portfolio. The door to the conference room opened. Not the main door. The side door, the one that connected to the service corridor, the one that the cleaning staff used to come and go without disrupting whatever was happening inside. It opened just a few inches, then stopped. Arthur looked up. Standing in the doorway, holding a microfiber cloth in one hand and a spray bottle in the other, was a woman he had seen dozens of times without ever really seeing her. She wore a neat gray uniform, pressed, clean, the kind of care that comes from habit, not obligation, and her silver-white hair was pulled back firmly at the nape of her neck. She was somewhere in her mid-60s, with the kind of face that had carried a great deal of weather without apology. Her name was Claudette Okafor Marchetti. She had been cleaning the offices on floors 29 through 33 of this building for the past 4 years. Before that, she had spent 6 years at a hotel in the financial district. Before that, she had worked as a translator and legal document specialist at a firm in Montreal for nearly 2 decades. A career that had ended the year her husband died, when grief and circumstance, and a series of decisions that made sense at the time, had carried her somewhere she hadn't expected to land. She had walked into this job at 61, after a year of struggling to get back into a professional environment where no one saw past her age and the gap on her resume. She had taken the cleaning position because it paid steadily, and because it got her out of the apartment her husband used to fill with noise and cooking smells and very strong opinions about hockey. She had not told anyone in this building what she used to do. There had never seemed to be a reason to. She stood in the doorway now because she had been about to knock, the schedule said. The conference room would be empty at 11, and it was now 11:22. And she had heard, through the door, a very specific sequence of Japanese phrases that she recognized immediately. Not because she was fluent. She wasn't fluent. But in the late 1990s, when her firm had handled a series of cross-border pharmaceutical transactions between Quebec biotech companies and Japanese investors, she had spent 8 months working closely with Japanese legal counterparts. She had learned enough to read contracts alongside them, enough to understand what they were flagging, enough to follow the thread of a negotiation conducted in a language not her own, enough to know that what Mr. Mori had said in that quiet exchange with his assistant was, "The exclusivity window in this clause contradicts what was agreed in the letter of intent. If this goes to enforcement, we are liable." She had not intended to interrupt. She had intended to close the door and wait. But she saw the man in the charcoal suit reaching for his portfolio. And she saw the Canadian lawyers watching him leave, and she thought about 11 months. She didn't know it had been 11 months. But she knew a closing meeting when she saw one, and she knew what a room looked like when it was ending badly, so she pushed the door open the rest of the way. Every head turned. Caroline Whitfield said, with the involuntary sharpness of someone whose nerves are already stretched, "This room is occupied." "I know," Claudette said. "I apologize for the interruption." She looked at Mori. Her Japanese was imperfect and she knew it. But she chose her words carefully, the way she had been trained to do with legal language. Precisely, without ornamentation. She said, in Japanese, "I believe I heard you mention a concern about the exclusivity window in the indemnification clause. I may be able to help clarify whether this conflicts with the original letter of intent." The room did not just go quiet, it rearranged itself. People who had been leaning toward the exit suddenly stopped leaning. Brett stopped clicking his pen. Arthur Beaumont Clark, who had practiced law for 31 years and had developed the specific poker face that comes from 3 decades of not showing surprise in front of clients, showed surprise. Mori looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in Japanese, "You work here?" "I clean here," she said. Something moved across his face. Not condescension, something more careful than that. He glanced at the document still open on the table. He glanced at her. Then he sat back down. She set the microfiber cloth and the spray bottle on the service trolley in the hallway. She walked into the conference room. No one stopped her. She pulled out a chair. Not at the head of the table. Not in the seat of anyone who had been sitting there, but at the far corner where she could see the document. And she sat down. Arthur pushed the agreement across the table toward her without speaking. She read it, not quickly, not with the performance of reading, but actually and carefully, the way a person reads something that matters. Page 47. The exclusivity window. The subordinate clause. She saw it within 40 seconds. It was not buried. It had been overlooked, which is different. The language in the clause extended the exclusivity period by 90 days in one scenario, but reverted to 45 in another. And the triggering condition for which scenario applied had been defined in an appendix that did not match the definition used in the original LOI. It was the kind of error that happened when multiple people edited a document in sections without reading the whole. It was the kind of error that could take months to litigate. She explained this, in English, to the table. clearly, without hedging, without apologizing for the explanation, without the verbal padding that people use when they aren't sure of what they're saying. Then she turned to Mori and said, in Japanese, a shorter version of the same thing. Enough for him to understand that the problem had been identified, that it was a drafting error and not an intentional misrepresentation, and that it could be corrected. Mori listened. He asked 2 questions in Japanese. She answered both. He turned to Yuki and said something brief. Yuki translated. Mr. Mori says he would like to take a short break and continue the meeting after lunch. The deal didn't close that day. Deals this size rarely do in one sitting. But it didn't fall apart either, which was the thing that had seemed, 20 minutes earlier, like an absolute certainty. Maury's team and Arthur's team spent the afternoon working through the clause. The appendix was revised. A call was scheduled for Thursday. The agreement held. Arthur asked Claudette to stay for the afternoon session. She said she had 3 more floors to clean. He said he would arrange coverage. She looked at him for a moment, the kind of look that takes the measure of whether a person means what they're saying, or is just filling the air with intention. And then she nodded and sat back down. That evening, after the Japanese team had returned to the Fairmont and the associates had gone home, and the floor had emptied out to the hum of the HVAC system, Arthur knocked on the supply closet where Claudette was returning her trolley for the night. He asked if she had a few minutes. She said she had a bus to catch. He asked if she would come back tomorrow, not to clean. She asked what that meant. He said the firm had used contract interpreters for years, had a network of them, but what she had done in that room was not just interpretation. It was legal analysis. It was the kind of thing that took years to develop, and he had been watching her do it in real time with a document she had never seen before. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I used to do this before. What happened? He said. Life, she said. The usual kind. He didn't press her. People who press on that phrase are usually not asking because they want to know. They're asking because they want credit for asking. Arthur did not press. He said, I'd like to offer you a consulting role. Contract basis, to start. We have 3 other Japanese pharmaceutical clients. There's a Korean transaction coming up in Q2. I don't know what else you speak. French, she said. Obviously. Some Mandarin. Enough Igbo to apologize to my in-laws at Christmas. Arthur blinked. Then he laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes out of people when they've had a long, high-stakes day and something genuinely surprises them into relief. We'll start with the Japanese files, he said. She said she would think about it. She caught her bus. She sat in the back near the window, the way she always did, watching the city lights dissolve into the residential streets of her neighborhood in Scarborough. And she thought about what it felt like to be seen. After a very long time of being invisible. Not invisible in the way people talk about it. Metaphorically, abstractly. Invisible in the specific, daily way of moving through spaces where people looked past you, because your uniform told them everything they thought they needed to know. Where people held elevator buttons and glanced at your cart and looked away. Where your name was not worth learning because you would be replaced eventually. And the replacement would not require an introduction either. She thought about her husband, who had always told her that what she knew could not be taken from her. He said it, the year she finished her translation certification. He said it the year the firm promoted her. He said it the year she had to walk away, when everything else felt like it was being taken, and she had stood in the kitchen of their old house in NDG, and cried in a way she hadn't allowed herself to cry before or since. What you know, he had said, his hand on her shoulder, is not a resume item. It lives in you. Nobody can put it in a box and take it away. She had not believed him entirely at the time. Grief has a way of making you doubt the things you used to hold as fixed, but she thought about it on the bus, and she decided he had been right. The next morning, she called the firm. She spoke to Arthur's assistant. She said she was available to discuss the consulting terms. A week later, Claudette Okafor Marchetti sat in a glass-walled office on the 32nd floor of a Bay Street tower, not with a trolley, not with a spray bottle, but with a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee that someone had brought to her without being asked. And she began reviewing a cross-border licensing agreement between a Canadian biotech company and a firm in Osaka. She read it the way she always read contracts, carefully from the beginning without skipping the appendices. She found 2 issues by page 30. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not the ending, the whole thing. A woman who spent 61 years becoming exactly who she is. Fluent in 4 languages, trained in legal translation, shaped by loss and persistence, and the kind of quiet dignity that doesn't require an audience. And for 4 years, she cleaned offices on floors 29 through 33. And no one asked her a single question that went beyond what products she used on the glass surfaces. That's not a story about one firm or one bad hiring decision. That's a story about what we do to people when we read their uniform instead of reading them. Think about the people in your life right now, the ones you pass without seeing, the ones whose names you haven't learned, the ones whose value you have already decided based on a title or a context, or the way they're dressed on a Tuesday morning. Think about what they carry that you have never thought to ask about. Claudette didn't become extraordinary when Arthur offered her a chair at the table. She was already extraordinary. The chair was just the first time anyone in that building offered her the chance to show it. Don't wait for someone's billion-dollar mistake to make you curious about the people around you. Ask before the crisis. Listen before you need something. That's the part nobody puts on the meeting agenda.